Three, maybe four Ram players to keep an eye on before the season kicks off in September. Another draft study, Raiders, Chargers, looking at the draft and deciding what could have been at one time and remembering one of the many next Jack Youngbloods, Bill Hawkins. This is RamView, and I'm Joe Rosian, and this is the May the 9th, 2022 edition of RamView. Thank you so much for clicking on. Thank you for everybody that responded over the weekend to my Jim Bertelsen post. A lot of folks were wondering about Jim Bertelsen. It's neat to see that he's remembered. Yes, that was the anniversary of his death. He died I believe it was May the 7th, 2021. And he had about 4 or 5 years with the Rams, a couple years as a starter. And it's neat to see that he's fondly remembered. I was wondering what people would have thought about that. But thank you so much for the responses, the clicks, and everything. It was a good weekend. But hey, one of the things I asked last week, as we talk about the Rams and where the Rams are in Los Angeles and proximity and everything, I did ask, what about maybe touching base with the Bolts and the Raiders? Because the Raiders in Las Vegas, and of course the Bolts has tenants in SoFi, merely tenants, not owners. And the response back, I got one positive response and a couple of different ones. So it was like, you know what, why don't you just mention a couple of things? I'm not going to call this Raider View. I've suggested to my friends who cover the Chargers, they should call it Bolt Action. They should have their own version of this. But no, I will make some brief mention. And I did a cursory glance before we get into the Rams today. I did a cursory glance at the Raiders and Chargers, and a couple things just really stood out. I'm one that likes to look at the trades and the draft picks and what panned out. If you look at the Raiders, it was a big deal when the Raiders traded Khalil Mack and Amari Cooper. Separate deals, but it netted them something like 4 or 5 draft picks. 3 number ones, 2 for Khalil, 1 for Amari Cooper. And then all of a sudden I saw in the thread, as I was looking it up, the 5th-year options for Clelin Ferrell, defensive end, Josh Jacobs, Jonathan Abraham were not picked up among a few others. And also this team has already lost Henry Ruggs and Damon Arnett. Ruggs to the DUI case where he's basically gone away forever, and Damon Arnett for his postings that they cut him for, just part of the madness was 2021 for the Raiders. But Josh Jacobs and Damon Arnett, they were the 2 number 1 draft picks that the Raiders got for Khalil Mack. And then the Jonathan Abraham pick at safety was for what they got for Amari Cooper. And none of them have been extended for a 5th year. I kind of understand Josh Jacobs because after 4 years in the league, carrying the ball quite a bit for the Raiders, I think we've seen the best of Josh Jacobs. You don't really give a second contract or extend a running back if you don't have to. Clelin Ferrell, number 4 overall a couple years ago, has not matched anything. In fact, Max Crosby got extended. He was a 4th-round pick, and Clelin Ferrell was 4th overall. And they have Jonathan Abraham has struggles, and he struggled in coverage, I believe, and they haven't extended him. And like I said, with Ruggs and Arnett, they're gone. So while I like a lot of the stuff the Raiders have done this year, getting out from Gruden and unfortunately Mike Mayock, who I thought was pretty good, getting away from them is going to help them. Some of their lower round picks, a la like Max Crosby, have helped out, and then makes them relevant. And as long as you got Derek Carr, I believe you are relevant. Looking at the Chargers, not my version of Bolt Action. I'm saving that for my friends. Call it Bolt Action. Need to do your own Bolt View, Ram View version of Charger football. But I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, okay, this is just the wild, wild west now. When you look at Denver, Kansas City, and then the Raiders and everything with Devontae Adams. Well, who are the guys that are going to be catching the ball for the Chargers? And I saw Keenan Allen, who I've had on my fantasy team for a number of years, and I like Keenan Allen, but he's going to be 30 this year, a little bit long in the tooth. Mike Williams, who they extended and gave a really nice contract to, is making about 20 rocks this year, but he's turning 27, and his health has not always been good. The one question I had for Charger fans, if there are indeed Charger fans out there, who's the guy that stretches the field? He doesn't have to be great. He could be a Van Jefferson, right? Really good or just okay. And I think Van Jefferson has the ability to be really good, but right now he's he's good enough and he stretches the field. This is where Tutu Atwell comes in for the Rams because he'll have the ability to stretch the field. But who's the guy that stretches the field for the Chargers? And the other question I had was, is Gerald Everett really the guy at tight end? I wanted to see who was projected at starting at tight end, and I knew Gerald Everett had signed with the Seahawks from the Seahawks last year. 1-year deal with the Seahawks, was a free agent this year, signed with the Chargers, and he's already projected as the starter. And so I was wondering, what do you think about that? Gerald Everett, really? Is he the guy? I mean, Gerald Everett was a second-round pick. Looked like he was supposed to be the guy for the Rams, but he couldn't beat out Tyler Higbee. And when it came to choice between Higbee and Everett, the Rams took the more consistent Higbee. And Everett didn't have a fantastic year at in Seattle last year. So really curious in terms of looking hard at the Chargers and competing in this West. And as I was comparing and contrasting the two, I started to feel better about the Raiders, believe it or not, because of, one, the wisdom of maybe not extending the contracts of some of those players, but on where they've hit in certain areas. Now, Khalil Mack, they just signed Kyle Van Noy, J.C. Jackson. The Chargers are doing their best. Telesero is doing a great job at GM, hindered by his ownership, but I just thought that was an interesting thing about the Chargers. Like right now on offense, outside of Justin Herbert and an aging Keenan Allen, and okay, Mike Williams. I mean, is Mike Williams really worth all that, though? I guess he is. Where does the Chargers offense going to be truly dynamic? So I'm just throwing that out there as a non-Charger fan, and just to keep an eye on as we go forward. Rams play both teams this year. In fact, that's going to be one of our standard operating procedures here at RamView. As we get into the season, we are going to follow all the teams the Rams play, and so we're familiar with them. I think sometimes we think the rest of the league doesn't exist. If you're in Dallas in week 5, you forget you have to go to Minnesota in week 7, just as an example. And all those games matter that lead up to the time that your team plays. How do they match up? What's their health like? How have they played in the weather? How have they played on the road? All those things do matter. But I did mention 3 players, maybe 4 for Rams fans to keep an eye on. And that is something that is really interesting because of the numbers of bodies in the rooms. The Rams have, I think, 7 or 6 safeties in the room. And so that really makes you want to wonder about Terrell Burgess, Taylor Rapp, because Terrell Burgess was 104 overall in 2020. Taylor Rapp, number 61 overall, second round in 2019. And in a safety room where Nick Scott has proved himself. Nick Scott's not going to go anywhere. Jordan Fuller's not going to go anywhere. But they just drafted Quentin Lake. And you get the idea that Quentin Lake's going to make it. And the eye is going to be on Russ Yeast, Taylor Rapp, and Terrell Burgess. The interesting thing about that is that Taylor Rapp has had his shots. He's had a few moments. He does have a little bit of a resume. Terrell Burgess, we've seen flashes and a lot of people like, but Rapp's going to be a free agent at the end of this upcoming season. Burgess has another year left. And so those might be 2 guys that you could see that maybe the Rams want to keep Yeast around, play special teams, develop him, because again, we know the Rams don't give second contracts to safety. So my thing would be, and we'll get back to it, is Terrell Burgess, Taylor Rapp. Keep an eye on them. Obviously, keep an eye on Bobby Evans, 2019, number 97 overall. If you're drafted inside 100 by the Rams, that is a value pick. And Bobby Evans has played so well that the team felt the need to reinforce with Logan Bruss and get a new contract to Coleman Shelton. And that tells me I don't think they think much of Bobby Evans. And he's another guy who's a free agent at the end of this year. And the one thing about Bobby Evans is that I think they'll just decide not to tender him because I don't think he's got a market. You know, the idea was 4 seasons and a comp pick with Bobby Evans, like all of the draft picks. But is there really a market for Bobby Evans? Because he's whiffed every time he's come to the plate, right? And then the fourth one that's a maybe, depending on how many defensive backs the Rams want to keep or corners they want to keep. You're running 3 out there consistently, so you're going to need at least a minimum of 2 as backups. But you got Ramsey and Troy Hill. You don't deal for Troy Hill and not expect him to make the team. Robert Rochelle was a draft pick a year ago, 4th round, who got on the field. They like Robert Rochelle. They just drafted Jacoby Durant and Darian Kendrick, and they're really high on Kendrick that he dropped in the draft extremely talented. He dropped to them because of personal issues that apparently have been cleaned up. So that leaves David Long Jr. maybe, and I don't have a problem with Long, but a lot of people do, as he's heading into his contract year. And so those guys, Taylor Rapp, Terrell Burgess, Bobby Evans, David Long Jr., they are players that could they be traded over the summer? Could they be traded before a final cutdown as the Rams want to get something for them if they're not going to get on the field? If those guys don't play any significant minutes, I can see Taylor Rapp playing, but if the rest of these guys don't play significant minutes, then they literally have no value after the season is over. Burgess has potential. There's a lot of people that like his potential. He was a quality pick, number 104 overall. I could see him being moved, even though he has another year on his contract. I could see him being moved. But remember, Burgess didn't even get into the rotation when the whole secondary or the whole safety room looked like a MASH unit. They went out and got Eric Weddle, right? And but I could see Burgess being moved. Now, Rapp has a little bit of a resume. He is an NFL safety. In coverage, will come up and hit. There might be somebody that wants a Taylor Rapp, and I could see him being moved. And then, again, David Long Jr. I think some of the stuff we saw with David Long Jr. last year was David Long Jr., but also the chaos that our safeties were last year. There was a lot of blown coverages. There's a reason Jalen Ramsey slapped Taylor Rapp last year, right, on the field in Baltimore. It's because our safeties weren't doing their job. I know it took time. They're doing that soft shell, the two deep safeties, and in Raheem Morris's defense, the modified Brandon Staley defense and all that stuff. But you remember what the Rams defense looked like early on last year. It was a huge learning curve. And I think David Long Jr. suffered for that. While he made his own mistakes, they still suffered. And he could be on the move, but I think there is some value. And then Bobby Evans, to me, he is hanging by a thread. He really is. I wouldn't be surprised to see one or two of these guys traded during the summer or at the end of camp if they can get it for a 6th or a 7th, because I believe Taylor Rapp might have value at the end of the season and somebody will sign him and you get your 4 years and a comp pick. But Terrell Burgess going into another year where he doesn't play, Bobby Evans, he's eating up roster space now, right? And that's the other issue. Are the Rams going to keep, 6 safeties, 7 corners? How many offensive linemen are they going to keep? It becomes a numbers game after a while, and who you want to keep and who you want to develop and who you can move on from. And you get the feeling that maybe they're ready to move on with the drafting of Logan Bruss. They're ready to move on from Bobby Evans. With the drafting of 2 safeties, Quentin Lake and Rust Yeast, they're ready to move on from Rapp and Burgess. And maybe that's a hedge and a protection against Nick Scott walking as well. And then you get the feeling of the drafting of Durant and Kendrick that, they're ready after a few seasons now to move on from David Long. So keep an eye on those guys. I could see them being moved. One of the things I haven't done yet today is I have not done the commercial. I am Joe Tarosian. I am a writer, sports writer. I write books. My football novel, Tangent Dreams, was published a few years ago, and it's seemingly having a second life on Amazon. So if you want to give this thing a shot, please do. Leave a comment, leave a review, and I'd be happy to talk to you about this. It's a high school football novel, and please read it. In my other job, I am also a pastor of a small church in Burbank, and I've written a dystopian Christian novel, explicitly Christian. The football novel is not. So if you're not Christian, you're not into that kind of stuff, that's okay. This one is Christian. I don't want to fool you, but this one is done pretty good in terms of review. Always want more in sales, but you could check out Sin Virus. Think Walking Dead meets the present day. Well, it is the present day. There we go. So you follow me on joetarosian.com, my website, or at JoeT13B on Twitter and Instagram. So as we come up to the 14-minute mark, we have hit it. One of the things I enjoy doing, one of my favorite things, and it's the downtime, is I do what I call a draft study. And I brought that up last week, or actually on Friday. We talked about reviewing the 1975 draft and what it meant for the Rams then and as it projected going forward as they made trades of obscure players like a Jeff Reese that were parlayed into all-pro safeties like Nolan Cromwell. And so I was looking at the Rams' top draft picks through the years, and I'll do this in more detail. I'll post from the Ram Cave after this is over, and you can see it in more detail. But I looked at who the Rams drafted. Like you look at 1974, the Rams were coming off a 73 season where I think they led the NFL in rushing. Jim Bertelsen ran for 850 yards. Lawrence McCutcheon ran for 1,097 yards, 14-game season. And so when the Rams drafted John Cappelletti at number 11 in 1974, I remember the headline. I believe it was one of the headlines or subheadlines, subdecks on the LA Times. It says Rams can start their own track team, draft John Cappelletti. And interesting because Cappelletti was the 11th overall pick. But if the Rams had wanted to, they could have taken at number 14 a guy named Randy Gradishar. Do you remember Randy Gradishar? I know a lot of people don't remember Randy Gradishar. He should be in the Hall of Fame. He was the middle linebacker for the Denver Broncos, part of their Orange Crush squad. I know he played in one Super Bowl with them in 77. I don't know if he was around to play in the 86 fiasco against the Giants, because every year was a Denver fiasco, right? Dallas in 77, that was a disaster. Giants in 86, Redskins in 87, 49ers in 89. Up until the end there, Denver going to the Super Bowl was a guaranteed blowout, right? But Randy Gradishar was a middle linebacker from at least 73 through 82, all-pro, really should be getting Hall consideration. And you wonder what the Rams would have done if maybe they had a full running back room at that time, taking Randy Gradishar. And in 1977, they drafted Bob Brzezinski, who was an excellent outside linebacker. He's the one that eventually pushed Isaiah Robertson out, and we all loved Isaiah Robertson. And Brzezinski was the number 23 overall pick. But at number 27 in that 77 draft, the Minnesota Vikings drafted Tommy Kramer. Now, again, you got to be a nerd, but 2-minute Tommy Kramer, outside of a few drinking issues, was an excellent quarterback for about 10 years in the NFL. He was the one that had to helm the Vikings purple gang as it was starting to decline, as Alan Page was traded, Carl Eller was wearing out, and he replaced Fran Tarkington. But it was an organization in decline. His numbers excelled, and then they moved into the Metrodome and lost their edge. Tommy Kramer was a really good quarterback, and you have to wonder, maybe if he had been starting quarterback for the Rams from like maybe 78 through 86, 87, if some of those seasons would have gone better when we were constantly in search of another quarterback, from Dieter Brock to a washed up, Burt Jones, washed up Dan Pastorini, washed up, Joe Namath, a washed up Steve Bartkowski, right? Bringing in Steve Dills, bringing in Jeff Kemp, and all the things the Rams were doing. You wonder what it would have been. Also, last week, I touched base in one of the Ram views and from the Ram caves. The Rams have never had a dominant tight end. That literally in the modern era, roughly from 1969 to present day, that Tyler Higbee is probably the number one tight end of all time. But did you know, as the Rams made their deal in 1978 to move up and draft Elvis Peacock at number 20, Ozzie Newsome was available, and he went at number 23 to the Cleveland Browns, and of course had a Hall of Fame career, and he would have been the tight end the Rams were always wanted. In 1981, they drafted Mel Owens at number 9. Okay, yeah, they drafted Mel Owens number 9. The number 8 pick, just ahead of Mel Owens, was Ronnie Lott. How close were they, right? If they had just maybe been patient or gambled a little bit, maybe they could have waited or just taken Dennis Smith, Ronnie Lott's running mate, a little earlier, who's another guy that should be in the Hall of Fame. In 85, at the number 21 pick, the Rams drafted Jerry Gray, really good cornerback. No complaints there. But at number 22, the Bears drafted William Refrigerator Perry, and he ate up space on that Chicago defensive line for years, something the Rams never really had after Merlin Olsen, Mike Fanning, Larry Brooks, and all those guys moved on. In 1989, the Rams had the number 21 overall pick again, and we're going to talk about this guy, Bill Hawkins, and they took him. And at number 22, Andre Rison was drafted by the Colts. The Rams had the number 26 pick in that same draft. And at number 26, they took Cleveland Gary. At number 29, the Dallas Cowboys took Steve Wisniewski with the 29th pick overall, and he was perennial All-Pro. In 1996, the Rams drafted Lawrence Phillips. We know how that went, number 6 overall. But the guys they passed on, perennial Pro Bowlers and Hall of Famers, Willie Anderson, tackle, Marvin Harrison, receiver, and this linebacker out of Miami who was drafted number 26 overall by Baltimore, Ray Lewis. Could you imagine if the Rams had tagged Ray Lewis early on? Talk about a culture change. In 1998, the Rams got another number 6 overall pick, and they took Grant Wistrom, who seemed okay at the time, but in reflection, his career just did not turn out the way everyone thought it would. And to get him, when drafting him, they overlooked Keith Brooking, the linebacker from Atlanta, Randy Moss, Alan Faneca. We're talking Pro Bowlers and Hall of Famers here. In 2001, they drafted Damian Lewis. They passed off on Steve Hutchinson, Hall of Fame guard. They drafted in that same first round, Adam Archuleta, Ryan Pickett, and they overlooked Reggie Wayne and a Drew Brees, the first pick in the second round. In 2003, they drafted Jimmy Kennedy and overlooked Troy Polamalu. In 2005, they drafted Alex Barron at number 19, and he was a disaster at tackle. In the process of drafting him at number 19, they could have drafted Aaron Rodgers, Heath Miller, or Logan Mankins. You've got Hall of Fame quarterback, Hall of Fame guard, and a tight end the Rams still have never had until maybe Tyler Higbee. In 2006, it was Ty Hill, and they overlooked a Hall of Fame center named Nick Mangold for the Jets, and Antonio Cromartie, a pretty good cornerback. Rams, with the number 13th pick in 2007, drafted Adam Carricker, and at number 14, the Jets took Darrelle Revis. In 2010, the Rams drafted Sam Bradford, number 1, and at number 4 overall was Trent Williams, and he's still knocking Rams over as he's playing for the 49ers. And then, of course, the epitome of disasters, the 2014 drafting Greg Robinson, number 2, when they had a chance. See, less needs not always perfect. When they had a chance to draft Khalil Mack, who went number 5 overall, and wide receiver Mike Evans. I think the Rams and Jalen Ramsey remember Mike Evans from the playoffs. He was drafted number 7 by the Bucs. Just some interesting things there, how history could have changed if some of those players had come to the Rams. Ozzie Newsome, Ray Lewis, really would have been fascinating. One of the other things we picked out of this was that between 1986 and 1990, the Rams just failed epically at the draft. In 1985, they drafted Jerry Gray. Jerry Gray was a consensus, was an all-pro, was a starter, bowler. Good draft pick, Jerry Gray. So they drafted Jerry Gray in 85, and they drafted Todd Light, another consistent starter, all-pro, Super Bowl winner. He played another cornerback for the Rams, and he was drafted in 91. So between 1986 and 1990, the Rams drafted 61 players. Of the 61 players they drafted between 1986 and 1990, only 7 became full-time starters. That's how you destroy a franchise. In 86, Frank Schad was the number 1 draft pick for the Rams. Tom Newberry was the starter, became the starter. Donald Evans, remember him, second round? Michael Stewart at number 213 became the breakout starter in that draft. Gaston Green and Aaron Cox in 88. Thank goodness for Flipper Anderson and Anthony Newman, right? Bill Hawkins and Cleveland Gary in 89. Bern Brostek and Pat Terrell in 1990. The Rams just whiffed on so many draft picks, and that's what led to the dark. Besides, you couple that with Georgia ownership, John Robinson flailing at coach, and John Shaw at GM, and that's why the Rams were set up for a disastrous 11-year run from 89 to 99. And so really interesting things there when you break it down, and especially since free agency wasn't what it is now, where you just couldn't rebuild. 23-minute mark, I mentioned his name. On this date, 1966, Bill Hawkins, number 1 draft pick in 1989, was born in Florida. The Rams drafted Hawkins at the 21st overall pick. He's 6'6", 269, out of Miami. He's a Florida kid, and he's the next Jack Youngblood, who's also born in Florida, right? And if he's not Jack Youngblood, maybe we're going to get the next Fred Dreyer. All right, great, awesome. If you ever want to talk about a whiff, oh man, the Rams swung and missed hard on Bill Hawkins. Now, Bill Hawkins led a good life. He's off to be a lawyer and everything. But this was a quote John Robinson had about Bill Hawkins when he was drafted. Bill is the kind of player that can develop into a big-time pass rusher, the kind of player we've talked about getting but could not find. And they did. They spent the 21st overall pick on him. In 4 seasons with the Rams, Bill Hawkins played in 42 games, started 8, and he had 5 total sacks. That's it. That's it. That's how you destroy a franchise. 42, 8-5 in 4 seasons for Bill Hawkins. Magic Johnson had a better stat line in game 6 of the 1980 finals against Philly, 42, 15, and 7. And so that kind of gives you a reminder, an education in terms of why the Rams were terrible for so long, and that you better appreciate these days as they hit on their draft picks and they use those draft picks in such great ways. But I digress. Thank you so much for clicking on. We are 25 minutes in and we're going to wrap this up. You could follow me anywhere I've said. Please hit like, please hit share, please subscribe as we build our imprint going forward. I'm Joe Tarosian, and this has been RamView. Take care and God bless.